All right, welcome back to another session of the Teaching Saints Virtual Summit. And today I'm excited to welcome Jeff Birk into the conference hall, the virtual conference hall, to talk about some teaching and presenting tactics that he has. So, Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing great, Kirk. Thanks for having me on. This is just an honor, and I'm really excited to share some cool stuff with everybody.
Nice. Well, maybe one thing, and I want you to tell us a little about yourself, but just so nobody sits here and is distracted by what you're saying by thinking, I've seen that guy somewhere. Where would maybe somebody in the Mormon universe recognize you?
So I've done a few Mormon movies. If anyone wants to think way back to when this whole thing started, when it really started to get a lot of momentum was when the first Singles Ward movie came out. Mm-hmm. And so I had a small role in the Singles Ward and the Singles Ward 2 or the Singles Second Ward. I did some voiceover stuff for the Saints and Soldiers movies that depict members of the church during certain happenings during World War II primarily. But I think the big one that people might be recognizing me from is the Home Teachers, where I co-starred with Michael Birkeland, who's done a lot of stuff. And so I was kind of the really, got to get our home teaching done. And my co-star was, I got to get home and watch the football game, and yeah. But other than that, that's pretty much been, where people might spot me in Costco and start following me around,
Have you had any weird interactions like that, or is that why you shaved your head so that nobody would recognize you?
It's that movie. We did it back in 2004, and so I've gone a little lighter up top here since.
Yeah.
I don't get a lot of recognition anymore, but every now and then I do. I will. For example, I remember I was walking in Costco once, and there was a kid that was just kind of following me around, But I think the funniest one, Kurt, was I was flying, and I had to connect through Minneapolis, and so I'm going from somewhere like New York to Minneapolis and then home to Salt Lake City. And on my connecting flight, I'm leaving the plane, walking down the jetway or gate, whatever they call it. And I get to outside of the gate, and the flight agent says, "Home Teachers," in
really?
Minneapolis, right? Yeah. That was kind of a goofy one, but it's fun. It's good. Yeah. And it's been a great experience.
That's great. So tell us about what do we need to know about you, about your background, maybe put you into context before we launch into your message today.
Yeah. So just so everyone out there knows how you and I got in touch, I was on a webcast with a friend of mine, Sean Rapier, and you heard my interview that I did with him and found out a little bit more of what I do. And just so that everybody has a background of why I'm going to be talking about what I'm talking about. When I was at BYU, there was a comedy club in Provo, Utah, and all of my friends said, "You've got to go do this. You're just born to do this stuff." And I've been a goofy face maker, noise maker my whole life, right? And so I went to open mic night once and went on stage. I wrote down 5 minutes worth of material. And Johnny Biscuit, the owner of the club at the time, he liked it. And he invited me back, and I kept going back. And then 5 minutes turned into 10, and then 20, and one thing led to another, to where I've just had some incredible opportunities over the past few years. Quite a while ago, I opened for Jay Leno. I got to open for Martin Short. If any of you are familiar with him, he's done a lot of movies. A few big names. It's just been a lot of fun. And so from a comedy background, that's where that comes from. But to continue the story, Kurt, what I've done primarily as my work is I'm a corporate presenter. So I go out and I speak with companies and organizations about a variety of topics. These can be companies such as Honda, Foot Locker, Virgin Trains, Liberty Mutual, New York Presbyterian. My real job, I should say, is with O.C. Tanner here in Salt Lake City, and I go teach managers how to say thank you to their people. It's all about appreciation and recognition. But the one thing that is really what we're going to be talking about today, it stemmed from my visit to a trade show one year, in Dallas, Texas. It was a trade show about how to train. Okay, so there's companies there that have their 10 by 10 and 20 by 20 booths set up, and we're going to teach you how to do this and train you how to do that. And the thing that really amazed me, Kurt, was I was watching these trainers on stage, and they were awful. Okay, now this is a trade show about training, all right? And so you got the one guy up there, he's got his shirt kind of half untucked, and he's looking around, and are my slides working? And does this, and okay, so, and it's death by PowerPoint. There's these PowerPoints that are up there that have 500 words on them, and they're all in 8-point font. And I'm just, oh my goodness, you've got to be kidding. And so it was that experience that inspired me to actually write this book. I'll show it up for everybody, and we'll show a screenshot of this as well. Train Like a Rockstar, Speaking Tips from a Stand-Up Comedian. And so I've been able to go out and train a few companies on this. They'll have me come in and train their trainers on not just how to be funnier, but how to do a lot of things better in their training. And so I took the comedy experience and the hundreds of thousands of stages that I've been on, and I said, how can I take that and move it into the corporate world to make sure that people don't get remembered as that was the worst training, that was the worst, most awful thing I've ever been through in my life, to make sure that they started to train like a rock star. But the cool thing about what we're going to be talking about today is that I've gone through the material, and I'm going to apply it to make sure that at the end of this session that we have today, you're going to be a better sacrament meeting speaker. You're going to be a better gospel doctrine instructor or Relief Society or Sunday school. And if you're a primary teacher, if you listen to the stuff that we have for you today and apply it, you're going to be the kind of primary teacher where when you are assigned another calling and you leave, your kids are going to beg you to come back. And here's why I say that. For about a year and a half, I was, me and my wife, we were instructors for the 10 to 11-year-olds. And I had a really interesting experience just a couple weeks ago at our state conference. We recently went through here in Draper, Utah, a ward split. I think in Draper, wards split about every 20 minutes. It's just crazy. And so we just went through a reorganization, and we're going into state conference. And in the lobby, one of my former 11-year-old kids, a kid named Joseph, the hardest, most difficult, okay? You primary teachers out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about, okay? He was the one, okay, that was going to, I'm like, okay, how are we going to handle him today, Yeah. He comes running up to me, and he says, Brother Birk, you've got to come back. You are the best teacher. Our teacher we've got now, oh, man, we need you back. And for me, it was just one of those pause in time moments where I just said, wow, it's all worth it. And the thing that made it worth it are some of the things that I'm going to be sharing with all of you today that I did in that particular class to make sure that these kids weren't wild and crazy and out of control, although they were a little bit sometimes. But how do I engage that group? Or how do I engage a stake conference group or my ward when I'm up giving that sacrament meeting talk, or it's my first time teaching gospel doctrine? Because and so I've got a lot of stuff written down here, Kurt, that I'll get to, but that's kind of where we're headed today. So.
Yeah, I love that. And, I love that you're leveraging your background as a stand-up comedian, but you're not saying that you need to be funny to be engaging. You don't need to do things to
and I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of the points that I wanted to make clear with everybody, is that our session right now, the time we're going to be spending together today, it's not about being funnier, okay? I'm going to be sharing with you some information and some ideas that I have gleaned from my experience on the stage of not just how to be funnier, but what, for example, are the 4 things that you're going to be able to do today that are going to set you apart from everybody else. And humor is only one of them. And, we talk about humor, and you might be sitting there wondering, well, how much is too much? And what we need to do is, first of all, to kind of do a level set here, is I'm going to show you a couple of extremes, okay? Now, how would you feel if somebody came in and started their gospel doctrine class like this, okay? Hey, everybody, it's great to be here with you today. I'm sensing a lot of energy in the room here. This is going to be fantastic. In fact, I feel like I'm almost in front of a group that you've all been to, like a monster truck and tractor pull show. How many of you have been to a monster truck show? Yeah, I know they're kind of crazy, right? But and I wasn't planning on going to the monster truck and tractor pull show until I saw the commercial. And those guys are pretty cool, right? I mean, they do the commercial, and I was ready to go. The guy starts out, prepare yourself for nothing but power, power, power. Goodyear presents the U.S. Hot Rod Monster Truck Racing Spectacular, invading the Delta Center April 1st and 2nd. Experience Quinn Rathman at his incredible mountain of mechanized machinery, Thor Ryan, a sleek 200-mile-per-hour jet dragster that transforms itself before your very eyes to a gut-belching rocket-shooting robot. Also see the ultimate Ford Phantom versus the Chevy Shell Shock in the Battle of Monster Trucks that is sure to singe your nasal hair. All right, let's say a prayer and get started. Now that's one extreme, okay?
Right.
We would never, ever, and I would never encourage anyone to go to that length to get everybody energized about what you've got to be talking about. So that's one extreme, but let's take a look at the other extreme, okay? Now, imagine yourself, you're sitting in sacrament meeting, and I'm getting up to talk. So here we go. Faith, as defined by Webster's dictionary, is, oh, heck, that's the second page. Here's the first page. Okay, now that's the other extreme. And right off the bat that it's going to be a painful 2.5-minute talk or 5-minute talk or maybe even a 10-minute talk. And I don't know, Kurt, have you seen talks like that on the bad extreme?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that one's much less difficult to imagine because I've seen. I've never seen the monster truck guy in sacrament meeting or into gospel doctrine, but I've definitely seen the person who just is there and sort of like, all right, let's get this over with.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that. I'm going to be sharing with you some things here that are going to help you to go forward in whatever role you've got. Again, like I said before, if you have an adult teaching call, again, Sunday school, gospel doctrine, Relief Society, Elders Quorum, whatever. If you're getting ready for a sacrament meeting talk, we're going to be talking about those as well. And again, if you're teaching our precious youngsters how to keep that class, engaged. And one thing before I even start into this, Kurt, is it's all about making sure that everybody, first of all, feels the Holy Ghost. We want everyone to feel the influence of the Spirit, because then the Spirit is going to testify to each one of us and each one of the participants that the church is true, that everything that we're hearing is validated and affirmed by our witness that comes from the Holy Ghost. And that's one thing that when I was putting this together is when it comes to using humor, we have to be very careful, and we have to use it very sparingly. I mean, you can go on YouTube and you can see some fantastic examples of the top 10 funny moments in conferences. You got wonderful clips there from President Hinckley. And, I'll never forget sitting in the priesthood session when President Monson did the ear thing, right? So it's very well placed. It's very appropriate. However, we don't want it to get out of hand to where our talk or our presentation is all about me. And it's all about how effective am I doing this? Because what happens is we start to run into this this notion of being in the priestcraft, as they talk about in 2 Nephi 26. Right now, we all know that priestcraft defined is setting yourself up as a light, and it's not about us. Okay, we are just the instrument. But if we're a really good, well-tuned instrument, then we can just be the mouthpiece, and we can use a little humor. We can use some great storytelling. We can use some memorization techniques that will allow us to make sure that we're delivering the message to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So any other thoughts, Kurt? I'm going to just kind of start jumping in here. And
no, I think that's a good, just sort of a lay of the land of how we can approach this, because I think sometimes everybody, it's sort of the cliche to start that talk with a really good joke, and sometimes we spend more time finding that really good joke or really good opener, sometimes it works, sometimes it's like just another dad joke that isn't really funny, but the speaker sure thinks it is, right? And I found the most captivating, and you'll see this in general conference, Elder Holland stands up there and he's right into his talk, Elder Bednar, he's jumping right on it. There's not like this, sometimes we feel like we need a runway, right, of a joke or to break the ice, when in reality, we're all there, we're ready and listening.
Yeah, and that's a great thing, because sometimes when we're sitting there and we're observing a talk that we are not very impressed with, we need to ask ourselves the question, do I have any distractions going on? Am I really listening to the best of my ability? Because the person sitting right next to us might say, that was the best talk I've ever heard. And you're like, what? What did I miss? And so in our efforts to do a better job giving sacrament talks or doing better lessons, let's also make sure that we work on being better listeners ourselves as we go forward. And I love what you said about Elder Holland. You know, we don't have time today. I mean, we could do another session, or we could even do another dedicated podcast if you wanted to. And I could talk about the art of storytelling as well as memorization. I was thinking of covering that here, but I just don't have time. But that could be another session on itself. We could do that later some other time. But the thing I love that you mentioned about Elder Holland is, and I was looking at this talk again last night, one of my favorite talks is called Where Justice, Love, and Mercy Meet, I think. It's April of 2016. And if any of you remember that talk, it's the one where he talks about, right off the bat, the two brothers that were rock climbing.
Yeah, they made a Mormon message out of it, right?
Yes, fantastic talk. And he's a general authority. Everybody knows who he is. He starts right into the story. He doesn't even start with, brothers and sisters, it's wonderful to be here with you today. None of that, but he can do that. And that's something that I'll talk about a little bit later on as we get through these points. But one thing I want to make sure that you all, as I get into these concepts, I'm going to give you 4 ways to make sure that you're giving your audience, whoever they are, you're going to give them the unexpected. Okay? You're going to give them maybe something that they've never seen before or never heard before. You want to put yourself just a little bit left of center, because you don't want to do what everyone else is doing, in my opinion, on this level. So before I give you these 4 things, I want you to make sure that there's 2 additional things before we even begin. First of all, we're going to learn some things today. But second, I need you to commit to me that you're going to practice these things. And I'm not talking about just practice. I'm talking about perfect practice. I think, the monster truck joke that I just did a few minutes ago, I always open my stand-up comedy routine with that one. And how I came up with that joke is I was watching TV one night, I saw the commercial, and it was replaying, right, because they're promoting it for the next week, and I got a tape recorder. And millennials, I just lost the millennials, right? A tape recorder, what's that, right? Okay, I got a tape recorder, I taped it, I typed it out, I memorized it, and I practiced it and practiced it and practiced it. I remember the first night I ever did that joke, I only made it halfway through, but the audience was with me and they were having a good time. So the reason practice is so important, I like this quote by Aristotle. He says, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act. It is a habit." So think about that as we go through. There's also a wonderful scripture in Doctrine and Covenants, section 84, verse 85. And I know that we're all familiar with this scripture. We've heard it, whether we were missionaries or we've heard it in talks, and it goes like this. "Neither take ye thought beforehand what ye shall say, but treasure up in your minds continually the words of life. And it shall be given you in the very hour that portion that shall be meted unto every man." Now we get excited about that last sentence. I know as a missionary, it was, oh, wow, I'm going to be walking around and stuff is just going to come to me. But one thing, I believe it was Truman Madsen pointed this out, very important point. He says, you need to go up another sentence. And the sentence that he focused on was, treasure up in your minds continually the words of life. Okay? Then you will start to have these things come into your mind. So as we go forward, I'm going to be challenging you to do things and to not just to do things, but to become something. Okay? Anyway, I'm ready to get going.
Cool. Let's do it. I love that intro.
Like I said, I'm going to be focusing on 3 areas. Those of you that are giving a talk in church at any level. And then second, those of you that have adult teaching responsibilities. This could be gospel doctrine, priesthood, relief society. And then the primary role is going to be my third one. So the first thing I want to talk about is what you can do in your first 2 minutes. The first 2 minutes can either make or break your message, however you're going to be delivering it. And another quote here that I really like is from a gentleman named Elliot Abrams. He said, "First impressions matter. Experts say that we size somebody up in the first 30 seconds to 2 minutes." And we've already talked about that. I've given you some examples of, we know how this talk is going to go. All right. Mm-hmm. But when I'm talking about giving somebody the unexpected, I look back on an experience that I had when I was 9 years old. It's back in Southern California. And I come from a family of 5 kids. We're hanging around in our home one time. My older brother comes home and he says, "We've got to go see this new movie called Jaws. It is just the coolest movie. We've got to go see it," right? So this is back in 1975, I believe is when the movie came out. So I'm a 9-year-old, right? stupidest mistake I ever made was going to see this movie because I saw the shark swimming through the air that night, right, coming to get me. But here's the thing. I'm sitting there. I've got my popcorn. And if you've seen this movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The picture starts underwater, and you hear, bum, 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 bum. And it was the music. It's like, wow, this is something interesting here. And so right off the bat, they had you. Steven Spielberg had everybody in the palm of his hand within the first 2 minutes of that movie, and we hadn't even seen the shark yet. So I want to share with you these 4 things, and I'm going to give examples of each role as we move along, these 4 things that are going to help you give your audiences the unexpected, which is what I used and what I continue to use when I'm whether in a church role or whether I'm doing a stand-up comedy routine. The first thing is this. If you got notes, go ahead and write this one down. And it's tell a joke. Okay, we've talked about this a little bit. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because I want to get to the others that are going to be equally as important in my mind. I want to give you some examples of what you can do. Now, this is one that I think is going to work well. It's obviously, we're going to be talking about clean humor. Okay, right? There's no need for
step one. Make it clean.
Yeah. We'll do a PG-13 version later on. No, I mean, it's not like that. These are all obviously clean. That was never my style anyway. To do off-color humor, which was a great thing for me because I had an agent tell me once from Southern California, he says, "Wow, Jeff, your voices, you're this, that, the other. I mean, you don't even need to go there," which I never had any intention of doing anyway. But this first little joke is called the 15-minute break joke. This is so easy. All of you can do this. I think especially for those of you that are giving a first-time talk, maybe it's your first time you're teaching that Sunday school lesson or you're teaching that Relief Society lesson. And here's how it goes. You get up to the front, and I'll just kind of play the role here. Hey, everybody, it's really great to be with you today. This is the first time for me teaching. It's gonna be fun. I always like to start with a 15-minute break. Ha ha ha! It'll get a laugh every single time. Now, everybody out there can do that. Okay, let's go ahead and start with a 15-minute break. You know, you can take it different ways if you want to. But that's one that I simply call the 15-minute break joke, okay? Now, another one that I've actually used this one in sacrament meeting. So if you've got a sacrament meeting talk coming up, consider this one, and it works really, really well. It kind of goes something like this. Brothers and sisters, great to be with you today. I've got a great group here, a large group. I hope that those of you in the back could hear me okay. I think the microphone is working fine. The reason I asked that question is because just a few weeks ago, I was in front of a group of about 300 people. And as it is, people are coming in late, right? And trying to get started on time. There's the whole front row, just like you're in sacrament meeting. No one is sitting on the front row, right? Everyone's sitting in the back. An older gentleman came walking in at the very back. And he sits down in the last seat in the very back where I said, "Sir, I don't think you're going to hear me back there. Why don't you go ahead and come up? I think you'll be able to hear me better up here." And he said, "Jeff, don't worry about it. I just bought a $5,000 hearing aid." $5,000? You got to be kidding me. I said, "Well, that's a lot of money to spend on a hearing aid. What kind is it?" And he said, "Oh, it's about 9 o'clock. So that actually worked pretty well in sacrament meeting. Now, for those of our international listeners, that's probably not going to, you're going to have to figure out something, in a different language because that's a good joke for those of us that are in English-speaking countries and English-speaking congregations.
Yeah.
But it's a fun joke. It's a very easy one to
that's good.
But the important thing on that is the delivery. Okay. In my book, I've got the joke written down, but when I'm in front of, training a company of executives that are trying to learn how to speak better, and I make sure to say, look, you got to get that joke exactly right. What kind is it? You're not going to say, so I asked him, I said, boy, that's an expensive thing. What kind of watch is it? You see, that ruins the joke right there. It's what kind is it? Because he thinks you're saying, what time is it?
Yeah.
So you got to say that thing exactly right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So that's another one. Now, when it comes to primary, and I'm going to get to some of the do's and don'ts of each of these groups later, but along the lines of humor with primary, I always found knock-knock jokes to be really, really good. And here's my favorite knock-knock joke.
All right.
Kurt, why don't you go ahead and start?
All right. Knock, knock.
Who's there? All right, let's get started. Okay, it's just
You set them up there.
You set them up, right? You set them up. So as I was looking through this particular part of our time together, I found a website that I want to share with all of you. I have no ties to this website. I've never met the person that runs it, but I looked at it, and it's called mormonzone.com. I don't know, Kurt, if you've ever heard of this.
I've never heard of it. Interesting.
But what I did is I went to Google and I typed in something like clean Mormon jokes, and mormonzone.com came up, and they've got some great jokes about a lot of different areas. So again, I've just given you a little bit of a taste of how to deliver a joke, how to use it. Again, don't use it too much. But if you're looking for a little bit of humor, I would try that site. It's pretty funny. I remember I looked through a quick list of the top 10 reasons to signal to how to signal to your high priest speaker in church that his time is done. And this 10 list was just funny. And one of those I remember was say amen after every sentence. So I thought that was pretty funny.
Nice.
Again, now that's the number 1 of 4, okay? And we've talked about how those can apply into each one, how we can put some humor into sacrament meeting or relief society or in primary situations. Again, I just want to remind you, use it sparingly, okay? Beware of priestcraft like we talked about earlier. Humor does not make a great talk. It can help it and can add a little bit of nice little flavor to it. But just remember that. Now, number 2, any questions or comments so far, Kurt?
No, I think that's great advice as far as humor goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get to number 2. Now, the second thing that I like to use a lot that, again, is going to set you apart and give people the unexpected from the regular run-of-the-mill speaker or teacher is I like to use questions, or I like to start right off by asking a question. Now, to do this effectively, obviously we have to consider our topic. All right? We got to consider our topic and then formulate some sort of an opening question. And I wrote down a couple of ideas here. Now, here's another key to trying to find out, well, what question should I start with? I go all the way back to my elementary school days when I was, 6, 7, 8 years old. Who, what, where, when, why, how. Okay? Just remember those words. Who, what, where, when, why, how. As I'm thinking about a topic, for example, the second coming, and I think about that first word, who. Okay, so, well, who is coming at the second coming? Who's going to be spared? Who is going to be taken up along with, being met with the city of Enoch? Who, you can do that. And then you can take that same topic, okay, what? Okay, what does the second coming mean? What is its significance? So that's a little tactic that I use when I'm trying to come up with topics. Now, let's get a little bit more specific. Let's say that I've got a sacrament meeting talk coming up, and it's going to be on the atonement. And I could start off just like Elder Holland does. I could get right to the microphone and I could simply start saying this. What was the single most important event in the history of our lifetime on this earth? Well, brothers and sisters, I'm here to tell you that single event is the atonement of our Savior, Jesus Christ. And I'm going to share with you the 3 most important things that you can understand. So that's a great way to start. Now, you could certainly start with saying, brothers and sisters, it's wonderful to be here with you today. I'm excited to share the topic, and I'd like to start by asking you a question. What is the single most important event that has ever occurred in our mortal lifetimes here on this earth? Okay, so that, again, is you consider the topic, you consider the question. What word did it start with? What? Okay. Here's another example. Let's say that you have to speak on Joseph Smith. You're putting together a talk about Joseph Smith, and you want to use a question. Well, what about this one? Brothers and sisters, I'd like to ask you this question as I start our talk today. What 3 practices over the next 21 days would help you to have an unshakable testimony of Joseph Smith? Now, my interest is piqued. Okay, that's a great opening question, because what it is, he or she is giving me a list of 3 things, 3 best practices that I can, if applied over the next 21 days, are going to give me an unshakable testimony of Joseph Smith. I might be sitting there thinking, wow, I really need this. I need to strengthen my testimony of Joseph Smith. I've thought about it my whole life. I've read the Book of Mormon a variety of times, but I'm getting out some notes because I want to make sure that I know what these 3 things are. So again, that's just another example of using a good question to start your talk in church. Now, how do we ask a question when it's relating to Relief Society, or maybe a gospel doctrine question. We can use the same thing. It's very similar to giving a sacrament talk. However, we're going to want to have more interaction. But try this one. Let's say that we're going to be talking about in our Sunday school class the importance of scriptures. Okay. What if you started some way like this? It's great to be with you all today. Looking very, very much forward to talking about what we have today. And I'm going to start by asking this question. How many of you would be interested in knowing how I memorized every chapter heading of the Book of Mormon?
Wow. Yeah. Intriguing.
Oh, right. Yeah. It'd be very intriguing. Well, I'm going to share with you some ideas on how I did that, which, again, that's why I said earlier, Kurt, we could spend another session talking about memorization and storytelling, because that's a goal that I did set for myself this year, and I did it. It's just been awesome. And it was a big goal. It was a daunting goal, but using the memory techniques that I use in my stand-up comedy, I was able to get it done in about 4 months. And the thing that I really wanted, I would sit there in sacrament meeting and I would hear these speakers talk about scriptures and they talk about concepts. And I just got sick and tired of not knowing where those scriptures were. Oh, I've heard that script. Where have I heard that? And so I set a goal for myself. You know what? I'm going to memorize every single chapter heading in the Book of Mormon, so that I can know, oh yeah, he's talking, obviously that's, he's talking about retaining getting and retaining a remission of our sins. Yeah, that's Mosiah 4. I know exactly where that is. And that's been a really, really cool thing. And I was going to say one more thing about that. I mean, it's not important. But again, it starts with a question, right? How many of you would be interested in knowing that? Yeah, me too. Okay. I would like to learn how that's done. And it's not as hard as, well, I don't know. It just depends. If we have another session, Kurt, on memorization techniques, I can tell you.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by it. I think it'd be something worth exploring. Yeah,
it's pretty cool. It's pretty fun. Now, along the lines of that particular idea, we've got Old Testament coming up next year, I believe, for those of you gospel doctrine teachers out there. And I was just talking with a good buddy of mine, and some of you might know him. His name is Scott Christopher, very popular Mormon actor. He's in a BYU TV series called Granite Flats. He was in movies called The Best 2 Years. He was the pharmacist in that movie, the one that got converted. He was also in, I'm trying to remember the one about, well, he played a bishop, and there was an ex-mafia guy who was relocated.
Mafia and Mormons, right?
Yes, mobsters and Mormons. Yeah. So he was one of the main actors in that. But I was just talking with Scott the other day. He's the gospel doctrine teacher in his ward, and he's like, "Oh, Old Testament next year. I am not looking forward to that." And I've taught Old Testament as a gospel doctrine teacher, and I'm like, dude, that is the coolest thing in the world to teach. I love teaching gospel doctrine. So the reason Old Testament gospel doctrine, the reason I mention that is if you want a really good source of questions to ask as it pertains to Old Testament lessons that you're going to be encountering this next year, there's a wonderful book called The First 2,000 Years by Cleon Skousen.
I remember seeing it on my dad's bookshelf. It's
yeah. And
it's not a light read.
Yeah, it's not. And it's like a textbook. Yeah. He starts out with about 10 or 15 questions, and then he covers the material. So it's taking me a long time to get through because I'm just that way. I say, well, I'm not going to go to the next chapter until I can answer all the questions. So keep that in mind. Cleon Skousen, The First 2,000 Years, if you're looking for some great questions to start your Old Testament lessons with. Finally, another great book that is a landmark in our church, of course, is Answers to Gospel Questions by Joseph Fielding Smith. A great resource if you want to go and find some great questions to kind of add to your question asking talent or skill as it pertains to starting your lessons or starting your talks and things of that nature. All right, so those are a few words on asking questions. Any other comments, Kurt? Any questions?
No, but it sounds like I think a lot of people default to just the body of their talk or the lesson, right? That I want to get the facts straight, the context right. Yeah. To really be intentional about thinking about your opening, and thinking about your closing as well. I would assume, right? And how can I capture this audience right on? Because you mentioned as far as we all should do maybe a little bit better job listening, but it really helps that those in your class or in the sacrament meeting listen when you really give them a reason to listen and really draw them in. You talk about your experience seeing Jaws. Like I love analyzing the openings to movies or to even, TED Talks or these things. It's like, they've thought this through. How are they capturing my attention right off the bat?
Yeah. And those are really good points. And here's why this is so important, what we're talking about today, and why it's also kind of scary. Because part of our state conference, we went to the early morning priesthood session. And as all of you know, the third block is changing. For those of us that are on the 3-block schedule, and if you need to be reminded, here's how it's going to be. The third block, they're getting rid of teachings of the prophets. That manual is going away. And so you're not going to be able to dive right into the manual or dive right into the lesson. From my memory, I think the first Sunday is spent on counsel. We spend a lot of time, we're going to be in counsel. We're going to talk about individuals in the Elders Quorum or in the Relief Society, how we can do service. Now, the second and third Sunday are going to be lessons, but they are going to, again, they're going to go back to the ensign talks. So the last thing that we want to do is just read an ensign talk. I mean, one of the participants raised his hand. He said, I'm going to push back a little bit here. He said, I don't want to sit there and listen to somebody just read through a talk, because it makes me want to go to another room and just put my headphones on and listen to the talk, right? And listen to the source. So it's incumbent upon us as instructors, as speakers, as teachers, as leaders, as facilitators to know how to do this stuff better. Okay, and just like you said, Kurt, it's going to take some of these skills in order to break away from the manual and break away from, okay, so brothers and sisters, let's read this together. So again, I'm going to get to some other ideas here that are going to help you to kind of step away from the manual and do a better job with that. Okay, number 3, use a statistic. Okay. I love using a statistic or a stat whenever it's appropriate. Let me give you some ideas. American comedian Jerry Seinfeld said a very interesting thing. He said, I'm just going to read it because I want to get this right. He says, according to most studies, people's number 1 fear is public speaking. Number 2 is death. Think of that. Death is number 2. That means for most average people, when they go to a funeral, they would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy.
Yeah.
So this is cool. What Seinfeld has done, he's actually combined 2 of the things I've talked about. He's combined a joke, but he's also using a statistic to bring that joke to life. Okay. So let me give you some ideas and thoughts on that, because it's something that can be very, very good with your approach. Here's just some funny ones that I kind of came up with, because they're really easy to find. If you need a statistic on a religious topic, they're out there. And I'll give you a source here in just a moment, but they're out there all over the place. Here's some funny ones just to kind of give us some humor along the way. More monopoly money is printed every year than, what does it say? Let me just make sure I get this right. More monopoly money is printed in a year than real money is printed throughout the world. Interesting little statistic. 40% of women have hurled footwear at a man sometime in their life. More than 10 people per year are killed by vending machines.
Wow.
Okay. In 2005, a man named Ronald McDonald robbed a Wendy's restaurant. And here's my favorite one. Britney Spears' music has been used by the British Navy to scare off Somali pirates. So, you can use a couple of those, you can find them. They're all out there. But let's bring this back to, how does using a statistic fit in a church scenario, in a gospel doctrine or presentation scenario? So in a church setting, here's one that you could use, for example, and they're all out there. According to the International Church Growth Almanac, published in 2014, just 30% of Mormons worldwide regularly attend church meetings. Now think about that statistic. You can use that statistic in a number of ways. Let's say that you're a bishop, or you're a high councilman, or you're in a stake position and you're having trouble with attendance. You could start your talk with that. I mean, and again, it's all about the delivery, right? According to statistics, brothers and sisters, 30% of Mormons worldwide are considered actively going to church every single Sunday. Now we're going to talk about some ways on how we can change that number and start to turn the boat a little bit more towards getting to 40%, 50%, and hopefully even higher. So again, using these statistics can be very good. Now that was one source that I found, was this, again, it's called the International Church Growth Almanac, published in 2014. Here's another example. And this is just a statistic from me. Brothers and sisters, we're going to be talking about temples today. I know it's a topic that is talked a lot about, but I want to give you an interesting thought or an idea. Maybe this is a fact that we could talk about. When I was born in 1966, there were 13 temples in the world. Today, there are 157. Now, let me talk about that just a different way. Think about it this way. When I was born in 1966, 13 temples on the earth. Today, there are more than 13 temples in the state of Utah alone. What does this tell us, brothers and sisters? Does this tell us that temple work is not important? Of course not. Does it tell us that we just want to build some really beautiful buildings? No. It tells us that temple work is very important and it's moving forward. So I'm going to share with you some ideas on how we can make sure that we're participating in that, from going to the temple, from participating financially, from doing projects and other things like that. So again, that's just an idea of using statistics that you can come up with on your own, or you can go to the internet and look for ways to use those. Any thoughts on that, Kurt, on this idea of using facts or statistics?
I love it because it definitely draws people in to think about maybe the topic differently. Or I think, like you said on that temple example, sometimes people get in this mode of like, I have to tell what the bishopric told me to talk about, or I have to say what the purpose of the lesson is today. And not that you can't do that, but by following that up with a statistic, that really draws me in, because it's not like, okay, here we go, the typical temple lesson. Okay, yeah, I get it. I need to go to the temple more, right? But by doing that, it draws me in a different way, and it sounds like it would take a few minutes of some research and, going through an almanac, of the church almanac or whatever, and finding some of these facts.
Yeah, exactly. And keep in mind that, the people in our congregations, the people in our classes, they're from all walks of life. Some people are visual learners. Some people are audible learners. Others are number crunchers. You might have some accountants in there that just love statistics. Give me more statistics. You're going to have other people that love stories. I think storytelling obviously is going to be the one that's going to help most people remember what you're going to be talking about. Again, I don't have time to really go into the art of storytelling here, but you're exactly right. Once we couch that statistic, maybe around some of the other things that we're using, that just helps us to maybe know, okay, I touched on something that Brother Jones over there, I saw his eyes light up because, he's a financial planner, and that's something that he really gets into. Yeah. So that's a little bit on point number 3. Now, just to review very briefly, very quickly, before we talked about telling a joke. We talked about, I just went blank because I'm thinking about
asking a question.
Asking a question, that's right. We've talked about using a statistic. Now, the fourth one is one of my absolute favorites. And it's using a quote, memorizing a quote. This obviously is used extensively as we watch General Conference. The gentlemen and the sisters that do this very well, one of the reasons they're able to do it very well is because they've got their talks right there in front of them, on the plated glass prompter readers. Okay, so they're able to kind of look like. And I was thinking about that, Kurt. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a GoFundMe account to where every single chapel has the teleprompter thing. So that people can just, instead of kind of doing this and looking for, you're going to be able to stand up straighter and read stuff.
Right.
But
I back that. So let's
yeah. Okay. You'll be the first donor. That'll be good. Nice. So let me give you some thoughts on using a quote, because in my opinion, this is one of the most powerful things that you can do. First of all, consider your source. And what I mean by that is, obviously, it's natural to go out and find a great Neil A. Maxwell quote or a great Bruce R. McConkie quote. They're all out there, and they're so easy to find. I remember years ago, my mom had a book put together by Richard L. Evans. It was a quote book, but it had a lot of other people's quotes in. It had Aristotle, it had Einstein, it had Cicero, it had all these other people. So consider the source and make sure that it's appropriate for the setting. Because if you're in sacrament meeting, you're giving a talk, I don't know. It might not be appropriate to give, a Barack Obama quote or a Donald Trump quote. All right, I'm using both just to cover my bases, right? But consider the source and check your sources. Okay, that's what I do. When I find a really good quote, I'm going to go and try to find a couple of areas that it's repeated. I mean, there are so many quotes out there that are attributed to the wrong person, or there's a huge chunk of it missing. So just make sure and check those sources, and also keep the audience in mind, like I said earlier on some of my earlier points. Now, this next one is very important to me as far as being a good speaker and a good presenter. And I know it's going to be hard for a lot of you out there. Memorize the quote if you can. In fact, not if you can, just memorize the quote. Start small, build up to it, and you can all do this. There's a lot of ways to do this. Some people are just great at memorizing, others are not very good at memorizing. But I want to give you an example of how this can be used very effectively. Quotes can be very, very small. You could even start a talk like this or a lesson like this. Brothers and sisters, I want to share a quote with you from Henry David Thoreau. He said, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." That's the quote. Now, where do we go with that quote? Well, there's a number of different ways. Let me tell you how I use it in the business setting. I'll actually start with a little bit of a story beginning out. I'll say, how many of you have heard of Henry David Thoreau? Fantastic. Thoreau, for those of you that aren't aware of who he is, he's one of these famous American philosophers that lived in the 1840s. And at one point in his life, he wanted to do an experiment. So he gets together with his friend Ralph Waldo Emerson, who we may have heard of before. And he said, "Ralph, I know you've got some land on the shores of Walden Pond, just outside of Concord, Massachusetts, in the northeast area of the United States. Here's what I want to do. I want to use that land for a couple of years. I'm going to go out, I'm going to build a shack, I'm going to live in for 2 years, and I'm going to observe the human condition, okay? I'm just going to see how people are." And that's one thing about Thoreau. He was a huge fan of studying people. In fact, what he said personally about this project he was about to embark on, he said, "I went to the woods," what was it? It just left me. "I went to the woods to live life deliberately, to see what life had, and not when I came to die, discover I had not lived." Okay? And so he goes and he builds this cabin. He lives out there, and he finds out that as he's observing the people in the town, they had jobs. They were working in the sawmills and in the stores and in the shops that they had inherited from their third and fourth generation grandparents and great-grandparents that had come across the Atlantic when we first settled that part of the country. One thing he noticed, though, is they didn't inherit the passion of their forebears. And that's when he came up with this quote, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." So the question is, quietly desperate for what? More stuff? No, it's for more purpose, more connection, more meaning in our lives. Think about the people in your lives, brothers and sisters. Do you know loved ones that are leading their lives quietly desperate? Maybe you've been there yourselves. So I'm here today to talk about what we can do to help those people break out of this rut that they're in, because they know they've got the capacity, they know they've got the potential, and I'm here to help us all know how we can help them get out of it. So do you see how I'm kind of using that quote? You know, you start with the quote, but then you can tell the story behind it. And I really kind of blew the first part. He said, "I went to the woods to live life deliberately, to confront only the essential facts of life and see what it had to teach. And not when I came to die, discover I had not lived." Now, you might be looking at me on this webinar and saying, "I could never do that. How did he memorize that?" But here's the thing, brothers and sisters. I had to work at it, okay? I had to go over it and over and over it. And like I said at the beginning, we're going to learn some things here today, but we're also asking you to practice some of these things. And I'm telling you, when you can use a good quote and tell a little bit of a story around it, it's gonna be fantastic things. I've got another one in a church example I'm going to show you. But Kurt, did you have a comment? I kind of
Yeah, yeah.
Spence, you might have had a
So
comment there.
I love what you would do that. Sometimes we'll just use a quote thinking, yeah, this is a really good quote. I like how it's, the alliteration of it. It sounds cool and it really is, it touches my heart. But you went in and asked deeper, like, well, why did this person say that quote? And
Yeah.
you almost tagged that quote onto a story,
Mhm.
which, man, that story drew me in. Like, man, yeah, I can see why I said that. Because I love that quote by Thoreau, but I think some people hear it and they're just like, quiet desperation. Like, what? I don't even know
Yeah.
what that means. Like, whatever, moving on. They don't,
Yeah.
it may go over their head, but by putting it with that story of why the person said it, that really helps articulate that thought in the minds of those listening.
Yeah, yeah, it does. And like I said, the art of storytelling is something that we could save for another time. But when you take that quote and you put a story around it, it brings it to life. Now, in a church setting, I've tried to memorize a lot of quotes, just so that I can, again, like the scripture said in Doctrine and Covenants 84, if you study them and treasure them up, all of a sudden you just got this stuff coming into your mind. And it's a wonderful experience, but you got to put the work in. Here's one of my favorite quotes from Joseph Smith. And this would be a very easy way. In fact, I think I'm going to write a talk around this quote. And here's why. I could get up and I could start. Brothers and sisters, the prophet Joseph Smith said the following. The things of God are of deep import, and time and experience and careful and ponderous and solemn thoughts can only find them out. Today, I'd like to cover each of those 5 items, what we are doing today to make sure that we are understanding the deep import of the things of God. And so then you branch off, let's first of all talk about time, and then I could construct a talk about, well, how much time are we spending in the gospel? How much time are we spending in our prayers? When was the last time you said a 15-minute prayer, or maybe even longer? When was the last time you got lost in one scripture for 20 minutes and you looked at everything? So there's time, right? And then the other thing was experience. Do we get discouraged because we don't have enough gospel experience? Or what kind of atmosphere or what kind of environment am I putting me in to make sure that I'm having experiences in the gospel so that I can understand the important things? And then you get into careful, this word careful. How careful am I with my blessings of knowing what I know? Am I taking careful thought of my thoughts and my actions and deeds, as again, King Benjamin talks about? And then you go into ponderous. Now, this is a huge one. I'd love to just write a whole talk on the art of pondering, because I think it's a lost art, right? In this idea and age of the average attention span being 6 or 8 seconds, this idea of pondering has all but left us. So it's careful, ponderous, and solemn thoughts. So again, there's one quote that we could construct a whole talk around, and that's actually only half of the quote. Joseph Smith goes on to say, "Thy mind, O man, if thou art to convert a soul to salvation, must stretch as high as the utmost heavens, must search into and contemplate the darkest abyss and the broadest expanse of eternity. Thou must commune with God." And then he goes on and talks about how the thoughts of man, he says, "Oh, how dignified and noble are the thoughts of God compared to the vain imaginations of the human heart," right? And again, that I had to set a goal. I had to learn that. I had to practice it. But I'm telling you, doing quotes is something that can be hugely important. And it's a wonderful way to start talks. If you listen to a lot of Bruce R. McConkie talks, he uses this quite often, except what he'll do is he'll quote the scripture and he'll talk about it. So anyway, that's what we're really getting with when we use quotes. And here's the other thing that's important about realizing. It's important to realize when you memorize the quote, when you are at the pulpit or when you are in front of your class and you're free of notes and you look at everybody and you say, Joseph Smith said the following: "The things of God are of deep import, and time and experience and careful and ponderous thoughts can only find them out." You've got credibility at the front of the room, okay? And that's another problem. That's one thing I'm going to talk about here in this last section is don't apologizing for your perceived incompetence or your nervousness or anything. And I'll get to that a little bit later. Just remember this, brothers and sisters. You are what we call in the business world the SME. You are the subject matter expert when you're in front of your class. So we want to add credibility to that, and memorizing stuff and just using a one-liner without having it. Now, there's a quote here somewhere that I wanted to share with you. You want to know that off the top of your head. All right. And it starts small. Start small, use that quote at the beginning, and then you can go ahead and refer to notes afterwards. I mean, look at me, right? I've done this for over 25 years, right? And I've still got notes, but I'm able to look at them, look at one word or one sentence, and then I can talk about it for a while.
Yeah.
So anyway, number 1, tell a joke. Number 2, ask a question. Number 3, state a fact or statistic. And number 4 is using a quote. So what this last section that I want to get to, Kurt, if we've got time, is what not to do. And this is going to go a lot quicker. But are we doing okay on time, or do you have any other comments?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I have a hard cutoff at 10:30, but I can go till then. So
okay, so it's 10:10. Okay, beautiful.
Yeah, we got.
Well, let me tell you about my whole life history. When I was a lad. Okay. Let's talk a little bit in those 3 roles that I mentioned that those listeners of you might be in, whether you're in an adult teaching position or you're getting ready for a sacrament talk or you're teaching primary. I want to share with you what not to do. Okay. And this, Kurt, you're gonna relate to. I know that you've seen this. I know that folks in the church all around the world have had experience either firsthand witnessing something like this happen or doing these mistakes ourselves. So let's first of all talk about in your talks, in your speeches, let's say a sacrament meeting for our purposes, what not to do. Here's item number 1. Don't start with, I looked up the word faith in the dictionary, and here's what it said, okay? Now, I might be ruffling some feathers here, okay? But what about my little 7-year-old that's doing their own talk? Okay, I'll give you that, okay? But I'm here to tell you, last couple of weeks ago when I went to stake conference, our stake president assigned a 7-year-old girl to give a talk at stake conference. She got up there with no notes and talked for, I believe it had to be 3 to 5 minutes about how she knew that God loved her. I know that God loves me because my brother does this. I know God loves me because my sister does this. I know that, and she went on. There was about 8, I know that God loves me because, but she didn't start in the typical way, all right? I mean, just be a little more creative. I mean, everybody does this, right? Didn't I say earlier that we want to give people the unexpected? Yeah. You just gave them the expected. Let's start talking about spirituality. I looked it up in the Webster's dictionary, just work on that one because I think I've seen enough of those, right? Okay, so that's one. No. Okay. And here's another big one. Don't go long, whatever you do, okay? I've got 1:00 church, like a lot of you do, and when it's 2:05 and I know it's time for the speaker to get done, you're just, okay. And here's where it's really bad, Curtis, when you're a Sunday school teacher and your time starts to go away because someone went long in church, you're like, gosh, I'm only gonna have a half an hour for my lesson now when I was planning 40 minutes, right? So here's how we get around that one. It's really simple. You want to give your talk to yourself, or you want to read your talk and time it. And I do that for sure. If I'm assigned to be the last speaker at sacrament meeting, let's say that my wife's going to take 10 minutes and I'm going to take 15 minutes. I type it out and I read it and I time myself. Now this does a couple of things. First of all, it makes sure that I'm going to be on time. Second of all, I'm practicing where I want to pause, where I want to give some emphasis, where I want to add some color to the words that I'm going to be saying. So that's another big thing. Don't go along whatever you do.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, Jeff, as a former bishop and somebody who's presided in a lot of meetings that's given this assignment out, I have people literally have no idea how to gauge when they look at content they prepared, how much time it's going to take. And even myself, and when I was in the stake presidency, I spoke in state conferences, and I mean, those meetings are to the minute that we need to get through these things. We can't go longer when we have so many speakers. So I was always shocked. I'd prepare my remarks and then rehearse them. I was always amazed how long it took me as opposed to, I thought it was a 20-minute talk and I went 30 minutes. And so then I was able to go back and say, okay, let's cut out the fat here. How can I adjust this, right? But so many people, I feel like they get so overwhelmed by the assignment to speak that they're just, studying, facts, context, scriptures. And finally at 8:30 before 9 o'clock church, they're like, okay, I think I have everything. And they're out the door, and they don't leave themselves time to really rehearse it and go through it. And as a leader, I'm sweating. They're thinking, okay, I told you 10 minutes, you're pushing 20. And now this other speaker, how am I going to handle this? Right. As somebody who's presiding over this meeting. So, man, I can't emphasize that enough, to just take a moment and rehearse it. You will always be shocked how long it is.
Yeah. You gotta resist, because if you don't do what you just said, you're going to look at the clock. You're going to realize that you're running out of time, and then you start getting into the thought process of, well, okay, I have to tell this one last story.
Yeah.
But that one last.
Sometimes I wonder that myself. They haven't decided to boot me out yet, but
it takes so long. And again, just remember, everybody, it's we got a lot of different personalities in the church. Some people are really good at speaking and have a lot of experience. Others aren't. Of course, we're going to be tolerant, of those that might not be as good. But that's why we're here today, is to help those of you that are wanting to improve and not make these mistakes, to listen to what Kurt is saying, listen to what I'm saying, try it, and it won't be a problem for you. So thanks for putting that in there. Another one that I wanted to say as far as talks and speeches, and I mentioned this before, don't be self-deprecating. Okay. And what I mean by that is this: how many of you have seen a talk that someone gets up there? I'm really nervous. I'm not good at this. You might as well be saying, I'm a loser.
I'd rather be anywhere else than right.
Yeah. When the bishop called me, I was just, again, this is not giving people the unexpected. Don't beat yourself up. Again, everybody out there in the audience, they don't know how bad you are, and you're not really that bad to begin with. Just remember that everybody is praying for you to have a good speech. They don't want to see a bad speech. You don't want to give a bad speech. So don't signal it by getting up and saying, I started putting this together last night at 12:30 in the morning. Don't do that, whatever you do, okay? We all want you to be successful, and you do too. Okay, so that's a little bit about what not to do in talks and speeches. Now, second, in your adult teaching role, whether it's a gospel doctrine teacher, a Relief Society, elders quorum, whatever. Kurt mentioned this earlier. I'm going to mention it again. Don't jump right into the manual. In fact, we're not going to be able to do that anymore now in the third block, because the manuals are going away. And I've talked about some ideas on how to do that. By using a stat, a question, a story, maybe a quote, maybe a little bit of humor. Just don't, okay, everybody, I'm going to start right here in the manual, and let's just go. Use one of these things we've talked about today to have a nice creative opening for that, and I think you're going to be just fine. The second thing I wanted to say about your teaching role is don't stand behind the podium the whole time. Now, we all know what the standard Relief Society room looks like, don't we? You got the table, and then you got the podium that sits right in the middle. This is hard for some people. Some people might be comfortable standing behind the podium, but walk around. What I do is I'll walk around to the front of the table, and sometimes I'll sit on the end of the table and say, so Brother McAllister, you had a good point just then about that. And so when they're giving that answer, walk around a little bit, sit on the edge of the table if you can, and just think about it, and use your space, okay? Because that's going to keep everybody's attention. Now, here's the other thing. If I'm standing here and I'm teaching to all of you, and I've got someone over here that's asking a question, my attention goes over here. The wrong thing to do is to walk over this way, because you're losing these people. They're going to check their phones. They're going to be doing something else. So you want to do the opposite. When someone over here asks a question, you kind of want to maybe stay here and maybe even, gravitate back and to the other side, because if this is my group, and I put all my attention over here to this question, see, I've closed everybody off. What you want to do is, by backing up this way, you're including all of these people in the question. Does that make sense, Kurt?
Yeah. I like that. Just those subtle cadences of how you're working the room, right? And and I think I love another reason I love watching TED Talks is to see how individuals are using the stage as they're presenting. They're not just rigid standing, right? And I would say, if I was president of the world and could influence the church, I think it would be so engaging if we reformatted the approach to general conference and gave it more of a TED Talk feel, and giving kind of having a side stage that a speaker could step away from the podium
Yeah.
and really use some visuals and things. Anyways, but I know we have a long tradition of I stand here and stare at the glass and I read, but
Yeah. Well, and you raise an interesting point because, and I can't remember what the format is that the church is doing that, but have you seen those things that Elder Holland is now doing with you have these groups of, and they're kind of sitting in a sea, and so
like a town hall debate type thing.
Yeah. And I can't remember what that is in connection with. Maybe it's the self-reliance program. I can't remember. But so it is kind of nice to at least see them doing that a little bit more, although it's not in conference, but conference is conference. So
it is.
Okay, so that's a little bit about moving around. Now, you primary teachers, this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart because I've been there, I've done that, and I want to share with you what works for me, and hopefully it'll work for you. And this first one's kind of weird. Don't stand and give your lesson, especially when you're with the 10 and 11-year-olds or younger. What I do is I sit at their level, and I'm not sitting back. What I do is I'm forward with my elbows on my knees, and I'm looking at them, and I'm engaging them and say, all right, you know what we're going to talk about today? We're going to talk about, when the saints were coming across, there were some interesting things that happened. And so I'm at their level because I found out very early that if I'm standing up, it might be kind of imposing and a little intimidating to them. Okay, so that's something to try is to sit and be at their level when you're teaching them. Again, don't use the manual. One thing, now use the manual, know the lesson, but try not to use it much in your actual lesson. Because here's what I found out. I'm sitting there, I'm on my hands, I've got my elbows on my knees, and I'm leaning in, and I'm engaging a little bit and say, okay, here's what we want to do. I've got a quote for you, and I turn away and I go to the manual, and you know what? I lost them.
Yeah, that's
right?
kids, right?
They're 10 and 11-year-olds, right? I've lost them. So it's almost like I got to be there and I got to reach back and I got something really cool I want to share with the manual. So that's something that you need to be aware of. Now, when it comes to telling or asking kids to read scriptures, you want to know what those references are, but here's something that I found very good. If I've got 3 scriptures that I want read, and I get to that point, I say, now, Lexi, I want you to go ahead and look up 3 Nephi 13. John, would you look up Helaman 5? And then so-and-so look up da-da-da-da. Instead of giving them the whole scripture, Lexi, look up 3 Nephi 13, verse 1. Because what are they going to do? They're going to start looking, what was the verse again? It's too much information. Just have them look up the chapter, and then you'll give them the verse later. And that seemed to work really, really well for me on that one. What else? Let's see. There was a couple of other things. I love this little tactic. And this, again, might be contrarian for some of us. The last thing I want to do is start my lesson with the lesson in primary. So when I get in, we have the opening prayer, and then I've got all the kids there in a little semicircle. Said, okay, let's start right here. Shannon, what did you do this week? What was fun? I have everybody give me a report of how their week went. What'd you do? What was cool? Hey, we went to Lagoon, or hey, we went to the beach, or we were this. So you see, I'm not in my teaching or facilitating mode yet. I'm another human being. I'm interested in them and what they've got going on in their lives. And once we hear all of that stuff and have a little bit of fun, it takes maybe 5 or 6 minutes. And okay, fantastic. Well, let's go ahead and start and jump right into the lesson. So that's a great thing. It's just kind of let's check and see how everybody's week was before we even get started. I found that really helpful.
I've really thought a lot about that. I actually wrote an article on Leading LD just about this. I call it my prime the pump principle when teaching, because there's, even for myself, I'm not a person that's afraid to speak in groups, but nonetheless, when I go into a room, it's like my psyche changes and it resets, where I'm like, I'm not comfortable here yet speaking, even though I'm not too much of an introvert or shy. Mm-hmm. But so by asking very superficial, common questions that everybody can answer, and they're really kind of fun, it gets people talking and hearing their voice in that room. And man, I've really seen good results of taking a few minutes to really pulling the class out of and getting them comfortable hearing their voice in there. And that leads to further discussion in the lesson.
Awesome. Let's see, one more thing. Make sure in your primary classes that you've called a class president. And also, they could call a counselor or at least have a secretary. And the reason why is this. You want to empower these kids. You want to shift the responsibility to them. Let them conduct the class. Give them opportunities to team teach. You can give them an opportunity to teach part of the lesson. Maybe some of them might be wanting to teach the whole lesson, okay?
Yeah.
This is something that is going to be very, very cool for you to do, and it's going to help you have more successful lessons. Another thing that I did, one last thing, was the first thing that I would do would be to plan a class party. And then the kids were like, wow, we're going to have a party to start right off. Okay, we're going to go over and have pizza at Jeff's house. We're going to watch the home teachers, all right? And it was a great way to get in with the kids, right? And they watched it, whether they wanted to or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, because teaching really starts long before the class starts. I mean, by building those relationships, building trust. I mean, that's what leads to a great experience, like you shared with that youth coming up to me. Hey, you've got to come back.
Yeah. Okay, so looking at my clock, I think we've got 5 minutes. I want to share one last experience with you that's going to kind of tie this all in. Okay. There's a quote by a gentleman named Herbert Bayard Swope. He said, "I cannot give you the formula for success, but I can give you the formula for failure. Try to please everybody." Okay? Now, everything we've talked about today is worth a try. But despite your best efforts, there are still going to be those who are going to be tuned out. There's not a single book or a story or a quote or a joke that is going to get through to that 6-year-old or to that 60-year-old. And I want everybody to be okay with that, okay? Don't beat yourself up. Now, here's why this is so important to me, and here's what we can do about it. Years ago, I'm headlining at a comedy club. There's about 300 people jammed into this club. I've got to do an hour. I'm headlining, which I'd done before. I wasn't worried about that. And it was a fantastic night. Everybody laughing, crying, having a great time.
And headlining means you're the main act, right?
I'm the main guy. So they'll start with an MC that'll do 5 or 10 minutes. They'll have an opening comic do maybe 10 or 15. The MC will get back up and do a couple jokes and then usually bring me on, right? Maybe they'll have 2 openers. But anyway, so I've got to do an hour. It's going great. Everyone's loving it except for one guy. And he's on the front row. There was nothing I could do that night to make that guy laugh, let alone smile. There wasn't a joke or a noise or a face that I could do. Who do you think I'm thinking about, Kurt, on the way home?
That one guy.
That guy. And you know what's going through my mind as I'm driving home? I'm driving, jerk. What was his problem? I was great. Everybody loved me. Was he deaf? I got all this stuff going through my head, right? Yeah. But what I did is I shifted my thinking. I put myself in his shoes, and I thought, you know what? What if he had a bad day at work? What if he got fired from his job? What if his buddies had brought him to the comedy club that night to cheer him up because he had a death in his family? And as I started to think that way, it taught me 2 very important lessons. Number one, the lesson I learned was that as I started thinking that way, it lifted a tremendous burden on my shoulders, thinking that I had to please everybody. But the more important lesson was this. I realized on that stage, that night, the only thing that I could do was to provide everybody with the material. And then who is it up to engage? It's up to them. It's their choice, okay? So where does that leave us? First of all, again, like I said, don't beat yourself up if despite your best efforts, people aren't joining along for the ride and having a great spiritual experience. But here's the thing that we hold ourselves accountable to. We have to create the environment. We have to do everything we can when we're preparing our talks, preparing our lessons. We're not going to go in and just kind of improv it and do it off the cuff. You and I are all responsible to create the environment, hopefully by using some of these things we've talked about today, to make sure that people are at least given the chance to connect and to engage to what we have going on. Because when we wrap this whole thing up, in the end, it's all about helping others, like I said at the beginning. It's all about helping others feel the spirit and influence of the Holy Ghost whispering to their souls that what you are saying is true, that Jesus lives, that we all worship the Father in the name of Christ, and we're getting that information through the power and the Spirit of the Holy Ghost. So that's kind of my sum up statement along everything that I've talked about. Any other thoughts or comments, Kurt? I'm pretty much through my notes right now.
No, man, that's usually I ask that they give just that's sort of a final encouragement to those listening, but I think you did that. And so I think we're good cutting it off there. And this is great. I'm excited to share it. I think you nailed it. People need to hear a lot of this stuff.